Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me now. It's 3 o'clock, so we're going to get started. This slide is just to give you some instructions. Everybody was muted upon entry into the webinar today. Later during the question and discussion period, you can unmute yourself. If you called in through your phone, you would unmute yourself with *6. If you unmute yourself through your computer, if you called in that way, you'll have to go back to the Quick Start tab and select audio connection and the mic symbol under there. If you are having some technical questions or technical issues throughout the webinar, you can send me a chat message, and I'll try to help you with whatever's going on. Please save any program-related questions to the question period. And as usual, if you have any questions after the webinar, you can email our Kids First mailbox at kidsfirst@od.nih.gov. So this is the pre-application webinar for PAR 18583, which is the 4th cycle of our XO1 sequencing program, discovery of the genetic basis of childhood cancers and structural birth defects for the Gabriella Miller Kids First Pediatric Research Program. And we'll turn it over to Marie Nieres.
Good day, everybody. Welcome to the pre-application webinar. I'm here to give you a bit of background to the program and introduce you to the members of the working group, give you some program contacts, and then we're going to have the program coordinator, James Coulomb, walk you through a bird's eye view of the details, and then Valerie will come back on to give you the nitty-gritty details of the XO1 application process. So this is the first slide that you should see. It talks about background, and the Gabriella Miller Kids First Pediatric Research Program was born in response to legislation which transferred $126 million into a Pediatric Research Initiative Fund and authorized the appropriation of $12.6 million per year for 10 years to the NIH Common Fund. Next. The vision of the Kids First program is to alleviate suffering from childhood cancer and structural birth defects by fostering collaborative research to uncover the etiology of these diseases and supporting data sharing within the pediatric research community. And the vision is going to be implemented by a data resource, Gabriella Miller Kids First data resource, where these data will be available to the research community to query both childhood cancer, structural birth defects, and to hopefully uncover pathways specific to each condition, as well as pathways that would be common among these conditions. Next. The Kids First Working Group is a group of NIH program officers that represent something like at least 11 institutes here at the NIH and our colleagues at the CDC. There are program staff from each of these institutes that are represented in the Kids First Working Group, and the institute directors that chair the working group are from NICHD, Child Health, HLBI, which is Heart, Lung, and Blood, NCI, which is the Cancer Institute, and HGRI, which is Human Genome. Next. This is a snapshot of the Kids First leadership team. You've already heard from Valerie Cotton, who is the point of contact for the Kids First program. As said, I'm Marie Nieres. I'm from the Common Fund, and I'm liaison to the program. And the working group coordinator is James Coulomb from NICHD, and I'll pass it on now to James.
Hi all. We talked about the vision for Kids First, that of fostering collaborative research on childhood cancer and structural birth defects. Our present plan involves 3 major initiatives. First, the XO1 program will be to identify children with childhood cancer or structural birth defects and provide sequencing services for cohorts from these conditions. The second initiative will be to build the data resource, and since it's difficult to assemble large cohorts for these conditions, we will facilitate the research by assembling the sequence data from the EXO-1 programs and other cohorts, especially future studies, and make it easily accessible to the pediatric research community. This will be done through the Gabriella Miller Kids First Pediatric Data Resource, and additionally, the resource will provide access to computational infrastructure and analysis tools to facilitate the identification of genetic networks that underlie childhood cancer and structural birth defects. Finally, in later years, we intend to, or we expect to fund analysis, validation, and mechanistic studies using the data sets in the data resource. Let's see, next. So you all are interested in the EXO-1 mechanism, and I want to stress this isn't a typical award mechanism. It's a mechanism that provides access to NIH-funded resources. If you're selected, you won't receive any notice of award, but can provide documentation for your institution or your chairs or whoever's need to document that you've received access to the sequencing services for your project. The EXO-1s are not intended to support very much in the way of analysis of the sequence data, but you can apply for funds to do analysis on your data either through the parent EXO-1, the parent RO1 or RO3 announcements, or we have a targeted DAR for an enlarged RO3 that's $200,000 over 2 years. The announcement number is there on the slide, but it's been very recently was withdrawn to make to provide for new application forms, and will soon be re-released with a new number, and this should be in time for the cycle 2 standard receipt dates, and I believe that's June 16th application. This is the 4th cycle of the EXO-1s, and you can see the previous year's recipients were proportioned between childhood cancer cohorts and structural birth defects cohorts. We had more structural birth defects cohorts, but we've been trying to make an effort to have the funding at least equal for the two types of cohorts. This year we expect to spend about $5.5 million toward the sequencing in these EXO-1s, and we anticipate being able to sequence approximately 6,000 to 7,000 genomes and probably spread it between 7 or 8 cohorts, all depending on the size of the various cohorts. And it's important to point out that we don't make our funding plans dependent strictly on the review impact scores, but we're trying to make a distribution of a lot of different program concerns spreading between cancer and structural birth defects, and trying to build a resource of data that reflects both a distribution of different specific conditions, as well as building sufficient numbers in each cohort to be able to get valuable analysis out of. So in the last few years of the program, we've we've sequenced or have in the pipeline sequencing for this set of conditions. Again, we're trying to balance between numbers of conditions and building a substantial database. The sequencing is done by one of two centers which we have cooperative agreements with, the Hudson Alpha Institute for Biotechnology, who are partnered with St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, or the Broad Institute. Both centers have the capacity to sequence either cancer or birth defects projects. However, in general, we assign to Hudson Alpha the cancer cohorts because of the expertise at St. Jude's in running RNA-seq and whole exome sequencing on tumors, and their expertise in analysis of these conditions. Most of the structural birth defects we expect to assign to the Broad Institute. But depending on the size of the applications we get and the capacity of the sequencing centers, you might be assigned to either one, and that could work out just fine. But this is our general framework. Let's see. So typically we expect to grant you 30x coverage for whole genome sequence. But if you have tumors or affected tumors, affected tissues for structural birth defects, we'll also have 30x whole genome sequence for germline, as well as 100x whole exome sequencing and 100x RNA-seq. But these designs are just to be expected, and there's some based on science we can make allowances and change the design a bit. The data will be deposited along with phenotypic data into the Kids First Research DRC, and from there it will be harmonized, and there will be some analysis done, and it will be made available both to you, the ECHO-1 recipients, and your collaborators, as well as to the pediatric research, general research community. Let's see. You're encouraged to contact the DRC in order to discuss your analysis plans that you're proposing, as well as to find out what kind of tools are available. And let's see, I should go back for that. A link there that's not fully active, but from there or from the FAQs that Valerie will point you to, you can make contact with the DRC and find out about what they have available. Let's see. As I said, portal's not fully up yet, but the Kids First Data Resource Center is headed by Adam Resnick at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and along with his collaborators named here. And now I'll turn it over to Valerie for more of the nitty-gritty involved.
Okay, great. So my name is Valerie Cotton, and I'm the program manager for the Kids First program. And one of my roles is to lead between the NIH as well as the sequencing centers and the EXO-1 investigators. So I'm going to go over some of the expectations for this FOA, particularly as they relate to the goals of the program, which will hopefully help you with your application. The information that I'm about to cover is also addressed on our FAQ page, and this is the link for that page. Our FAQs are also much more detailed and describe a lot of questions that people had, because that's the definition of FAQ. So we do encourage everybody to take a look at that page. Also continuously update our FAQs, and we'll actually probably do a round of edits after today based on the questions you guys ask and any questions we get to the Kids First mailbox. We'll also record today's webinar, and we'll post those on the FAQs as well. So the primary purpose of this funding announcement is to generate high-quality whole genome sequence data, as well as whole exome and transcriptome data for tumors from cancer projects and affected tissue from structural birth defects projects, to discover variants contributing to these pediatric conditions. To that end, the expectation is that DNA extractions are of sufficient quality and concentration for whole genome sequencing and whole exome sequencing in the case of the tumors and affected tissue. RNA extractions from tumors and affected tissue are of sufficient quality for RNA sequencing. As you'll see when we talk about the other attachment section of the XO1 application, we ask you to describe different quality and quantity metrics. We ask you to talk about the fixation and extraction methods so that we know what to expect with your samples. In general, I want to point out that it's expected that nucleic acids are already extracted or will be extracted and shipped shortly after notification of award, or not award, of cohort selection in this case. And we'll talk about that timeline at the end of the presentation. This is a slightly more detailed version of the slide that James already presented. As he mentioned, the sequencing centers are charged with performing the sequencing and variant calling, and they generate the associated data files. Here we describe the general method for the sequencing that will be done. So what we refer to as germline and normal samples are basically the genomes that represent the program or the family members that you're contributing. The DNA will be covered at a target average of 30x. And then if you are submitting, there's all opportunities to sequence the genome, exome, and transcriptome of the tumor for cancer projects. As James mentioned, for this cycle, we are also opening up this pipeline for affected tissue structural birth defects projects as well. So this is one of kind of the recent changes of this cycle of the XO1 program. You may propose other methods or approaches that kind of veer away from this general framework. For example, in the past, people have suggested higher coverage. We have also run a linked long-read pilot for phased genome analysis with both Hudson Alpha and the Broad because they have the capacity to do that. We're not implementing that on a large scale, but if you feel you have a very strong justification for trying that out with cohort, please go ahead and describe that proposal in your application. However, keep in mind that specific requests could impact and possibly reduce the total number of samples we're able to award your cohort. And overall, project designs will be finalized in discussions between NIH, XO1 investigators, and the sequencing centers. This is a table that we created that briefly explains the recommended concentration and quantity for each sample type. I just want to point out that it's available on the FAQ page for you to reference. So this program is congressionally mandated to provide resources that will drive discovery pediatric research. Therefore, data sets and resources generated by the program must be made as broadly shareable and accessible as possible to the pediatric research community while protecting participants. Broad data sharing also enables researchers to easily combine and compare data sets for cross-cohort analyses, which is also a goal of this program. So we expect that cohort participants have given consent to allow for sharing of individual-level sequence data through an NIH-approved repository. So that are consented for the broadest level of data sharing are of higher priority. This means that we may select a cohort that can be more broadly shared over a cohort that is more restrictive, regardless of how each application scored. I'll talk a little more about data sharing in later slides, and we actually have even made a specific section of the FAQs completely devoted to data sharing, and I highly encourage everybody to check that out. In line with the NIH genomic data sharing policy, each EXO investigator has 6 months of proprietary access to their data before it is made available to the public. In general, the clock starts, the 6-month clock starts when the sequencing center has generated all the data and you as the investigator have had access to it. During this pre-release period, you are obviously already working with the sequencing centers, and you can be working with the Data Resource Center and other direct collaborators. At the 6 months, other end users will also be able to apply for access to your data, the data generated from your cohort. Regarding clinical and phenotypic data, of course, while phenotype data helps to inform analyses and how pathways and conditions overlap, the Data Resource Center is actually working to leverage existing community standards to harmonize clinical and phenotypic data, which will help searching for data sets in the forthcoming data resource portal. It'll facilitate analyses, and it will also help make data sets interoperable with other data efforts. To that end, we do expect a basic set of data elements that we have described in the funding announcement, but we always prefer more phenotypic data. The deeper, the better. Most importantly, you just have to describe what clinical and phenotypic data is available for submission to the Data Resource Center so that we know how this relates to how you're going to analyze the data and what's available for submission. We also ask in the FOA that you indicate whether participants could be recontacted, because it's good to know whether additional information could be collected. Of course, it is important to have a study design that will lead to genetic discovery. Therefore, larger sample sizes are always preferred. However, we recognize that these conditions tend to be rare, so you may want to consider collaborating with other investigators to pool cohorts together. You can also consider collaborating with one of our current EXO-1 teams who are described on our website. But the point is, no matter what the sample size of your cohort, you just need to be able to justify how genetic discoveries will be made. The same goes for the family structures that you have available. Especially for non-trio designs, it's really important that you make it clear to us how many families you have, how many of the family members are affected or unaffected, who are you exactly proposed to sequencing, and who do you have versus who do you just have family history information on. Overall, study design obviously plays into the analysis plan. However, we'll talk about a little later how you can provide more detailed family structure information in the other attachment section of the application. And another point about analysis plans, like James mentioned, the EXO-1 opportunity does not come with funds, but it is important to have an analysis plan so that you are able to demonstrate that the research design is adequate to make discoveries and that the data is overall usable, both to you, but also eventually the general pediatric research community. So we recognize that the analytical power of each data set will be enhanced by integrating data sets together in the data resource. But again, it's important to demonstrate the data can be usable on its own. You are welcome to, and you should consider partnering with other research teams with relevant expertise to develop an analysis plan. You may also want to contact the Data Resource Center to talk about the tools and resources that will be available in the Data Resource Portal. Another point I want to make is that one of our goals is to broaden the diversity of both childhood cancer and structural birth defects data sets that are represented in the data resource. This means that priority may be given to conditions that have previously been sequenced by Kids First, and this is kind of assuming that other expectations are already met. Broad data sharing, really high quality samples, sufficient study design. This certainly plays into the Kids First program's decision. Now I'm going to take some time to talk about the information we request in the other attachment section and how you can make use of a fillable form we created and provided on the FAQ page to organize some of this information. I would like to emphasize that this information is extremely important for program staff to understand the details of your cohort, which does play into how Kids First makes our final decision, but it is not necessarily considered reviewable scorable criteria, so ask for it in this other attachment section so that it does not have to cut it in fully to your research strategy. Use of the form that we provide is absolutely optional. Applicants may choose to decide the samples, the clinical and phenotypic data, family structures, and any other format. We just provide the form as an option for one way to organize this information. So the first attachment that we ask for is the institutional certification. This document that assures that the sequence data that will be generated from the samples you propose sequencing meet expectations of the genomic sharing policy. You must provide an institutional certification that covers all sites contributing samples to your project, specifies whether the data is consented for deposition in an NIH-approved repository, and a document that indicates what the data use limitations are. In this image below, you can see examples of the standard data use limitations developed by NIH, and on the right, you can see these checkboxes. These are called data use limitation modifiers. Let me see if I can do it right here. So both of these are based on the language of the informed consent, which we'll talk about in the next few slides as well. I do want to take a moment and mention that many teams may not be able to obtain a full institutional certification from their IRB in time for the application due date, even though we highly encourage obtaining it if you can. But we will accept a provisional institutional certification instead, and we'll talk about what you can do in that situation. However, a full institutional certification must be submitted to the NIH before your cohort can be officially approved for sequencing. We have these steps for obtaining an institutional certification. The first step is to download the current NIH institutional certification template. I'm aware that there are other versions of templates floating around on the internet. We really need you to use the most recent version available at this link, NIH link. And if you need help deciding template, because there are a few options within there, please feel free to contact me or anybody else in the program. After you have this template, you, as the investigator, can fill out the first page and list any all sites contributing samples for sequencing to your project. Leave the second page blank because that's for the IRB to fill out. You then provide the institutional certification with just the first page filled out to your IRB, along with the participant consent forms and any other information your IRB needs. You will review the consent forms to determine what the data use limitations and the data use limitation modifiers are. One point of emphasis is that it is expected that data use limitation will be designated as general research use unless there are specific language in the consent form or consent forms that specifically restricts some type of use. And there are other standard options that typically cover existing consent language that they can choose from. After our review the institutional certification assigned by the appropriate officials, there's lots of information available about who those officials are, and then submitted to the NIH. We have recently created a cover letter that explains the XO1 program and explains these steps and the expectations for both the NIH and the program overall regarding data sharing and institutional certification. So you are more than welcome to download that cover letter to help kind of outline how to use the institutional certification for your IRB. So I'm going to go over what the first two pages of institutional certification. So this is the first page, and at the top, you are asked to address this to a genomic program administrator. Here I've provided a full list of GPAs, as they're called. In general, we recommend that you address your letter to the GPA from the institute from which you already have a grant or a working relationship. If you don't know who to choose for your GPA, feel free to contact me. Further down, you can add multiple submitting sites to one document. You actually have the option, if you prefer to have a separate document for each site contributing samples to your project, you can do that, but you can also list multiple sites in one document. Down below, I do want to point out that all the sequence data generated by Kids First is controlled access, so that's the box that should be checked there. At the bottom, it asks about NCBI being able to upload a display of variance, both fields and frequencies. We encourage you to check both of these boxes unless for some reason you think that one of these would be prohibited. This is the second page of the institutional certification, and again, this is for the IRB to fill out. It's up to the IRB to interpret the language of the consent form, to list each site on the bottom and designate what the data use limitation for that consent group is. And then we expect it to be general research use with none of the data use limitation modifiers checked, unless there is some specific language that would call for that. If you have any questions about the institutional certification, you can contact me. You can also talk to a genomic program administrator, and IRBs can talk to GPAs about questions they may have as well. Not to go over the third page of the institutional certification because that is simply the signing page. Like I mentioned, you may not be able to get a full institutional certification time for March 22nd. So what you can do is provide provisional certification. That document basically specifies that these samples meet the genomic data sharing policy, but there's no space for designating the data use limitations. So we added a table on our fillable form. This table looks very similar to that second page of the institutional certification. And if you don't know what your data use limitations are from your IRB yet, we actually ask that you designate what you think they will be, because it's really important for us to take that into consideration. The second page of the fillable form is a table that we created to help you organize information about your samples. Again, it's really important for program staff to understand exactly what you have, so that we can anticipate how much it might cost, how many funds we're able to devote to your project. For example, sometimes processing samples could be more expensive than processing blood samples, so we really need to understand the breakdown that you have for your cohort. We also ask for some other details like quality and quantity metrics. Also want to point out that, like I mentioned before, we expect that your samples will be ready to ship shortly after you're notified, which would be late this year, July or August. So we want to know exactly how many samples will be ready as possible. Then we also recognize it could take a few months to get some extractions completed, go get tissue samples from repositories. So they want to know how many samples will be ready by January of 2019. And this fillable form is a Word document. That's very intentional because, again, you can use this to organize the information you have in whatever way you wish. And you don't have to use this. If you have all this information organized in a different way, you can submit that as an attachment as well. The bottom half of this table used to say just tumors, but now it's tumors and affected somatic tissue that you would propose for sequencing. Oh, I want to emphasize that in that scenario, the typical protocol is that the tumor tissue would also undergo whole genome sequencing as well as the whole exome RNA sequencing. So those tissues would have to be of quality for all types. This is a table, very minimalist, basic table we created to help you organize the clinical genotypic data that you have. This kind of outlines the basic information that we requested in the FOA, but you can use this you can expand it to list all the variables of data that you've collected. We also appreciate it if you indicate whether certain information is only available for the proband versus the parents or some other family members. Again, you can modify this, expand it, list all the information that you have available to submit to the Kids First data resource and to use for your analyses. But we really do need to know what information you have available. I also want to mention that the Kids First Data Resource Center is working to establish common data elements that will help with the searchability and some analyses across cohorts. As they work to develop those basic elements, we will update our FAQs so that you can reference them and see what information will be really helpful. The last attachment that we ask for, and this is particularly in the situation where you are not proposing trio-based design, again, we need to understand what types of family structures you have and how that informs your analysis plan. So we need to know if you're doing multiple families, how many family members roughly per family are you proposing sequencing? How many unaffected family members are you proposing for sequencing? Do you have a certain number of consanguineous families? If so, what does that structure look like? If you have pedigree information, or at least a few samples of pedigree information, you can submit that as an attachment. But I also created an example of a table that would work for one group where you can indicate, give us a sense of how many different types of family structures, how many different families you have the trios, and how many are quads, and how many are you have multiple siblings or a cousin. You can modify a table like this to kind of summarize the information of the samples that you are proposing. Okay, this is the overall timeline for this cycle of grant for this year. January 16th when the funding announcement was published. Today is February 8th, and this is our webinar. Letters of intent are due on February 22nd. These are absolutely optional, but we do encourage you to do it if you intend to apply, because it helps our scientific review officer plan for the review. Applications are due on March 22nd. The NHGRI Special Emphasis Panel will convene the peer review in April or May, but the date is not yet set. Since there's no official award associated with the EXO-1, it actually does not go to an NIH Institute's Council for review. Rather, the Kids First Working Group discusses the summary statements and selects which cohorts will go into the sequencing pipeline, and how many samples from each cohort are quote-unquote awarded or allotted, based on the funds available for the sequencing centers. So we have limited funds. We often are not able to award one group their full proposal. However, I just want to go back and say it's extremely important that what you do propose is ready either when or shortly after you are notified of your solution. After the working group creates a proposal for the 2018 cohort, the final level of approval is actually come from our 4 Institute Director co-chairs. Like Marie said, they're from NICHD, NHLBI, NCI, and NHGRI. And that's the last step before we can notify EXO-1 recipients. I also want to point out that in the fall, after notification, we host an orientation call where all the new EXO-1 recipients are on the line with some of us from the NIH and the sequencing center staff. And that's like a much more detailed view of some of the information we went over today, but it's more about getting your samples into the pipeline, and today is about preparing your application. So before we open it up for discussion, I want to take a moment to see if any of my colleagues have anything else to add. I know some of them are on the line. Any mistakes? Okay, great. Then we will open up this webinar for questions from all of you as potential applicants. You can unmute yourself on your phone using *6, or you should be able to unmute yourself on the computer going back to the audio connection and unmuting the mic symbol. You can also message me through WebEx, and I'll read your question out loud. You can message me if you're having trouble unmuting yourself, and I can unmute you from here. Have we gotten this like that streamlined?
No, it's okay. We'll get more.
One thing I did want to jump in and say, the $12.6 million this program gets every year. As you know, we're funding the Data Resource Center, and James, I think you said
9.5.
Okay, it's $9.5 million that goes towards sequencing, which roughly translates into 7,000 genomes, but that depends on a number of factors.
No questions?
Wow.
Okay, well, we have his first mailbox. My direct email is also, I don't know if I want to say this, it's also posted on the FAQs a few times if you have questions for me.
Program contacts.
And there are several program contacts from different institutes listed on the funding announcement itself. We encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns about your application or the times for obtaining your samples. We certainly encourage you to reach out if you have questions or concerns about data sharing.
Going once.
So, wow, I think this is a record. I think we're gonna. Oh, here we go. I got one. What's the NIH's policy about consent for use of germline material for patients that are deceased?
Informed consent still. I think the informed consent.
Yeah.
The informed consent.
We don't have any different policy for deceased participants at this point in time, but this point has been raised before.
Yeah.
It's under consideration. Okay, well, again, this webinar will be recorded, and we encourage you to reach out for us for any questions. Thank you for joining today, and good luck getting your applications together.
Thank you. Bye.